Guardrail. Avoiding regrets in your life. Nobody plans to wreck their life any more than they plan to wreck their car. On the road, we have guardrails in place to keep us from straying into dangerous or off-limit areas. What if we had guardrails that could do the same thing in our lives? Some of our biggest regrets could have been avoided or at least minimized if we had personal guardrails for our money, relationships, morality, and emotions. Personal guardrails are standards of behavior that become matters of conscience. They're rules you set for yourself that light up your conscience when you bump into them, and just like highway guardrails, they're placed where it's still safe. Long before you blow up your career, a personal guardrail should tell you that you're heading for trouble. Way before you say words you can't take back, a personal guardrail should caution you to consider your words carefully. The Apostle Paul gives us useful advice as we start setting our own guardrails. Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise. The Apostle Paul knew, and maybe you've experienced, that you can end up in a mess without breaking any laws. You can wreck your finances without spending unethically. You can ruin a relationship without doing anything sinful. Guardrails aren't just meant to keep you on the safe side of right versus wrong, they're meant to keep you on the side of wisdom. So here's the question we're going to apply to our money, relationships, morality, and emotions over the next few days. In light of my past experiences, my current circumstances, and my future hopes and dreams, what's the wise thing to do? In your marriage, in your career, when it comes to where you should live or how you should spend your time, what's the wise thing to do? How would that question have changed the choice or situation you regret most in your past? Where could it help you today? If you're living too close to the edge, it may be time to set a guardrail. Our greatest regrets are usually connected with people we've considered friends. Maybe yours is connected to a colleague, a classmate, or an ex-boyfriend. Maybe it's a group of friends that in hindsight you wish you'd never met. Even if you were alone, chances are your greatest regret somehow grew out of a relationship. These ill-fated friendships have taught us, often the hard way, that our futures are impacted by the people we spend time with. This is why we need relational guardrails. Solomon, one of the wisest men who ever lived, wrote, "Walk with the wise and become wise." In other words, wisdom is contagious. Do life with the wise, and over time, you'll become wise. It happens automatically. And there's a second part. For a companion of fools suffers harm. When you hang out with a fool, you get caught up in the consequences of their bad decisions. You catch the shrapnel. Your reputation is ruined like his. You get fired like her. You aren't invited next time either. Relational guardrails help us avoid foolishness fallout. So, as you think about your friendships, here are 3 guardrails to consider. When one of these things occurs, let it light up your conscience before you suffer harm. 1. You catch yourself pretending to be someone other than who you really are. 2. Something that's never been a temptation before is now something you're considering. 3. You hope the people you care about don't know your whereabouts. Remember, guardrails aren't meant to declare something or someone right or wrong. They are meant to guide you back toward wisdom. So, are any of your friendships veering into the danger zone? Which guardrail are you bumping up against, and what are you going to do about it? All of us know someone, are someone, or will raise someone whose life would be completely different if they had established guardrails to govern their sexual morality. Doing so isn't the popular choice. In fact, nowhere else does culture do a better job of baiting us toward the edge and then chastising and shaming us when we mess up than when it comes to moral boundaries. We watch movies, listen to songs, and read books that glorify sex outside of marriage. We entertain ourselves with it all the time, but when it actually happens, when someone we know has an affair, we're appalled. So, fair warning, culture will be working against your efforts to establish moral guardrails, but in the Bible, the Apostle Paul explains why they're so important. He says sexual immorality is uniquely damaging. In fact, he puts it in a category of its own, saying that it is sinning against your own body. In other words, it's bad for the other person involved, and it's bad for you. And what's more, you never escape the consequences. You can fully recover financially. You can fully recover academically. But when it comes to sexual sin, it's different. Forgiven? Absolutely. This has nothing to do with God accepting you and loving you. It's just that, with sexual sin, there is no do-over. So what's Paul's advice? Flee. Isn't that what every husband wants his wife to do? What every wife wants her husband to do? What every brother wants his little sister to do? Flee from sexual immorality. How do we make that a personal guardrail? Let's consider how Jesus defined sin, and then we'll see how that applies to sexual sin. Throughout his ministry, Jesus taught that what's best for other people is what's best. Sin, then, is anything that falls short of that. Anytime I put me before you to your detriment, that's a sin. Anytime you put you before me to my detriment, that's a sin. So, the guardrail for our sexuality should keep us from doing anything that's not what's best for the other person. Will it make them feel shame? Will it become a secret they carry for the rest of their life? Will it undermine their future relationships? Then, as Paul says, flee. When you think of financial guardrails, you may think of staying out of debt. Staying out of debt is good, but according to Jesus, you could have zero debt and lots of money in the bank and still be in a ditch financially. Intriguing, right? In verses from Matthew, Jesus says that all of us are mastered or owned by someone or something. Then he gives us two unexpected options: God or money. Most of us would expect him to say we could either be mastered by God or Satan. But Jesus says his chief competitor is our money. Essentially, he tees up the question: do we own money or does money own us? Without financial guardrails, most of us will end up in one of two ditches. We'll either veer off the cliff of spending or we'll crash over the median of saving. One is unbridled desire, buy, upgrade, repeat. The other is unbridled fear. What if I don't have enough? What if that happens to me? In both cases, money is our master. We're chasing it so we can consume it now, or we're chasing it so we can save it and consume it later. We need a financial guardrail that makes God our master, and that's exactly what we find in Matthew 6:33, tucked at the end of a long talk about how we should view and use our money. It's just 4 words. Seek first his kingdom. God's kingdom is an others-first kingdom. Or to use the same words, in God's kingdom, what's best for other people is what's best. The guardrail that will keep us out of the ditches of spending and saving is putting others first in our finances. Give to others first. Save for your future second. Then, live on the rest. And here's the good news about this guardrail: it can be automatic. Once you've identified an organization or cause you care about and set up a system of giving, this guardrail will keep your finances on track without any extra effort or thought. Whether at home or at work, as part of a friend group or a family, we've all learned how to monitor and modify our behavior. Sit up straight, say please, wear this, do that. Yet, every once in a while we say or do things that just don't make sense. It's like something spills out, maybe an angry outburst or bitter remark. We may even say afterward, I don't know where that came from, but we do know, if we're honest and bold enough to face it. It comes from inside us. Both Jesus and King Solomon tell us what's in our hearts is the problem. We need guardrails for our hearts, because eventually our behavior on the outside will mirror what's going on inside. There are 4 emotions that should ding our consciences. They should cause us to pause and look inward to see what's going on in our hearts. They are guilt, anger, greed, and jealousy. Guilt says, I owe you. I owe you something because I took something from you. In response to guilt, confess. Confess to the person, bring it to the light. Anger says, you owe me. You hurt me or took something from me. In response to anger, forgive. Forgive the person who owes you. Let them off the hook. Greed says, I owe me. Greed is the assumption that it's all for my consumption. In response to greed, give. Become a generous giver. No strings, no score. Jealousy says, life owes me. Someone else got what or who I deserve. In response to jealousy, celebrate the other person, write them a note. Compliment them on the very thing you may be jealous of. When we bump into these emotional guardrails, we need to pay attention. They're alerting us to danger. Ignore the warning, and regret will be waiting on the other side.